What happened when the President of Poland stepped forward at Arlington National Cemetery, carrying a wreath of red and white flowers? In the silence of that moment, beneath the burning sun, history, sacrifice, and honor collided in a way that few watching would ever forget. Stay with us, because this story is about respect that transcends borders, courage that endures across generations, and a legacy that belongs to every soldier who never came home. If you believe their memory should live on, make sure to follow and share this story so others never forget. The air above Arlington National Cemetery shimmered with summer heat, the kind that presses down until even whispers feel heavy. Rows upon rows of white headstones stretched like silent sentinels across the rolling hills, each one marking a name, a sacrifice, a life cut short, but never forgotten. Tourists and veterans alike filled the pathways that morning, their conversations naturally fading to respectful murmurs as the appointed hour approached, and the weight of the occasion settled over the sacred grounds. This was no ordinary day. At America's most hallowed military cemetery, the atmosphere carried an unusual tension, a sense that something historically significant was about to unfold. Long before the wreath appeared, long before the soldiers adjusted their ceremonial stances, long before the international cameras turned toward the marble steps, visitors could feel the gravity building like storm clouds on a summer afternoon. The center of this gathering stood the tomb of the unknown soldier, a pristine block of white marble engraved with words that have echoed through American history. Here rests in honored glory an American soldier known but to God. Its stark simplicity carried more emotional weight than any monument of grand design ever could. The clean lines and unadorned surface spoke to something deeper than architectural beauty. They represented the ultimate anonymity of sacrifice, the thousands who gave everything without expectation of individual recognition. For nearly a century, this sacred site had been guarded without pause, day and night, rain or shine, through storms and calm, through national celebrations and national tragedies, by members of the United States Army's elite Old Guard. To these men and women, the tomb wasn't merely an assignment or a ceremonial post. It was a calling, a sacred duty performed with mathematical precision that bordered on spiritual ritual. Every measured step, every crisp turn, every moment of perfect stillness served as an act of devotion to the countless unnamed fallen the monument represented. The guards who walked this post understood that they were part of something larger than themselves, larger even than the military hierarchy that trained and deployed them. They were living links in a chain of remembrance that stretched back through generations of American warfare, connecting the present moment to every battlefield where soldiers had fallen without their stories being recorded, their names being remembered, their sacrifices being individually honored. On this particular morning, however, the ceremony held layers of meaning that extended far beyond America's borders. From across the Atlantic Ocean, Polish President Karol Nawrocki had traveled to honor not only America's unknown warrior, but also the shared legacy of sacrifice that bound nations together through war, tragedy, and the hard-won victories of freedom. His visit represented far more than diplomatic courtesy or international protocol. It was a statement carved directly from the painful lessons of history itself. Both America and Poland had witnessed generations of their young people march toward battlefields with no guarantee of return, leaving behind families who would never receive more than a folded flag, a military telegram, or sometimes nothing at all except the hollow ache of uncertainty.
The two nations understood, perhaps better than most, that freedom's true cost is measured not in dollars or resources, but in the irreplaceable lives of those who choose service over safety. The morning preparations reflected the international
significance of the moment. Military personnel moved with heightened purpose and attention to detail, understanding that eyes around the world would be watching, that this ceremony would be recorded, broadcast, and remembered long after the participants had left the grounds. Cemetery staff had arrived before dawn to ensure every detail was perfect, from the positioning of ceremonial barriers to the angle of camera equipment, from the coordination of security protocols to the precise timing that would allow the ceremony to unfold with the dignity such an occasion demanded. As the sun climbed higher in the cloudless Washington sky, casting sharp shadows between the marble headstones, the stage was set for a moment that would bridge continents, honor the dead of multiple nations, and remind all present that some values transcend the boundaries drawn on maps. The sacred ground of Arlington was about to witness an act of international remembrance that would resonate far beyond the borders of any single country. As the appointed hour arrived, a subtle shift in energy rippled through the gathered crowd. Military precision began to unfold before hundreds of watchful eyes as an American guard stepped into clear view, his ceremonial rifle resting firmly against his shoulder, every element of his uniform representing decades of tradition and countless hours of meticulous preparation. His scarlet tunic was immaculate, pressed to knife-edge perfection, while the shine of his ceremonial shoes reflected the white marble beneath his feet like polished mirrors. The guard's expression remained locked in the disciplined focus of centuries-old military tradition, his presence serving as a powerful reminder that this ground was sacred, set apart from the ordinary world by the sacrifices it commemorated. Each of his deliberate steps echoed against the marble surface, creating a rhythmic cadence that seemed to steady the collective breath of everyone present. His movements followed patterns rehearsed thousands of times. 21 measured steps. South, a crisp turn. 21 steps north, another precise turn. Each number held significance, representing the highest military honor. The 21-gun salute reserved for heads of state and fallen heroes. The guard's uniform told its own story of dedication and attention to detail that few outside the military could fully appreciate. Every brass button had been polished to mirror brightness, every crease pressed with mathematical precision, every element of his appearance reflecting not vanity but respect for the uniform, for the institution it represented, and, most importantly, for the unknown soldier whose eternal rest he protected. His white ceremonial gloves remained spotless against the dark metal of his rifle, and his movements demonstrated the kind of muscle memory that comes only from endless repetition and unwavering commitment to excellence. Then, drawing every gaze, in the crowd came President Karol Nawrocki himself. Dressed in a dark business suit with a striped tie, his appearance was formal yet respectful, the colors creating a sharp contrast against the pale brilliance of the tomb behind him. But it was what he carried that transformed the moment from diplomatic visit to profound act of international remembrance. In his hands rested a carefully crafted wreath woven with red and white blossoms, the national colors of Poland, its silk ribbons stirring gently in the warm summer breeze. To casual observers, it might have appeared to be simply an attractive, floral arrangement, beautiful but unremarkable. To those who understood the deeper currents of history and sacrifice, however, the wreath represented something far more significant: the grief and remembrance of two nations woven together, a living symbol demonstrating that even vast oceans could not divide the universal cost of freedom. Every flower had been chosen with deliberate care, every color carrying symbolic weight that spoke to shared values and mutual respect. As President Nawrocki approached the tomb, the silence around him deepened with each step, as though the very air understood the magnitude of what was unfolding before the assembled witnesses. There were no speeches interrupting the moment, no distracting commentary, no unnecessary ceremonial flourishes, just the slow, steady rhythm of dress shoes against marble stone, the solemn focus of the American guard maintaining his vigil, and the Polish president's purposeful advance toward the monument that represented so much more than one nation's military history. He moved neither quickly nor hesitantly, understanding instinctively that this moment required its own pace, its own breathing space. Each step forward seemed to stretch time itself, allowing the crowd of observers to absorb the reverence radiating from the simple act of approach. Veterans in the crowd found themselves standing straighter, their own military bearing unconsciously, returning as they witnessed this display of respect for fallen comrades. Tourists lowered their cameras and phones, sensing that what they were about to witness transcended the need for photographs or social media posts. The wreath itself was a masterpiece of symbolic artistry. The deep red flowers represented the blood spilled in service of liberty, while the pristine white blossoms symbolized the purity of sacrifice given without expectation of earthly reward or recognition. The ribbons bore no words in Polish or English. Some meanings, the designers understood, transcend the boundaries of language, speaking directly to the human heart through color, form, and the universal understanding of loss and honor. Behind President Nawrocki walked a small contingent of Polish officials and military attachés, their own expressions reflecting the gravity of the moment. They carried with them not just diplomatic credentials, but the collective memory of Poland's own countless, unnamed dead, soldiers who had fallen in forests and fields across war-torn Europe, resistance fighters who had disappeared into history without recognition, civilians who had died defending their homeland against impossible odds. When he finally reached the base of the tomb, President Nawrocki came to a complete stop. For several heartbeats that seemed to last several minutes, time appeared suspended in the summer heat. The watching crowd, the positioning cameras, the international implications, all of it faded into background as the Polish president stood face to face with history incarnate, preparing to complete an act that would join Poland's voice to the eternal conversation of remembrance that defines this sacred place. The moment had arrived. With movements that spoke of deep reverence rather than hurried formality, President Karol Nawrocki slowly bent forward and placed the wreath of red and white flowers against the pristine marble surface of the tomb. The vibrant colors immediately blazed against the white stone, creating a striking visual contrast that seemed to represent the collision between life and death, between memory and eternity, between the temporary beauty of flowers and the permanent weight of sacrifice. The red and white blossoms seemed to pulse with their own energy in the bright morning sunlight, as if carrying within their delicate petals the heartbeats of all the soldiers they symbolically represented. Each flower appeared to tell its own story of interrupted life, of futures that would never unfold, of families left to carry absence where presence should have been. The ribbons fluttered gently in the warm breeze, adding movement to what was, otherwise, a scene of profound stillness. Behind the kneeling president, the American Guard remained absolutely motionless, transformed into a living statue of respect and vigilance. His presence served as a powerful reminder that the duty to honor the fallen extends far beyond ceremonial moments and international visits. It is an ongoing commitment carried out minute by minute, hour by hour, day after day, regardless of weather, regardless of witnesses, regardless of recognition. The Guard's unwavering focus communicated more than any speech could have expressed about the nature of true dedication and the meaning of service above self. This sacred moment belonged not to any single person or nation, but to every soldier, whose ultimate sacrifice had purchased the freedom that allowed the living to gather peacefully in places like Arlington. Throughout the assembled crowd, the impact was immediately visible and deeply felt. Veterans from multiple wars and conflicts stood taller, many raising trembling hands in instinctive salutes, their weathered faces reflecting their own memories of friends and comrades who had not made the journey home. Their eyes held the particular kind of grief that comes from personal loss, the understanding that behind every folded flag and every military funeral lies a unique human story cut short by the demands of duty. Tourists who moments earlier had been jockeying for better viewing positions or better camera angles now stood in hushed reverence, their devices lowered and forgotten. Something in the atmosphere of the moment had communicated to them that they were witnessing something larger than any photograph could capture, something that demanded presence rather than documentation. Parents instinctively drew their children closer, hoping that some fragment of the reverence hanging in the summer air might settle into young hearts and minds, planting seeds of respect for sacrifice that might bloom in future years. The International. Observers present, diplomats, military attachés, foreign journalists, found themselves emotionally affected in ways their professional training had not prepared them for. The ceremony was demonstrating the soft power of genuine tradition, the way authentic respect and heartfelt remembrance could communicate across cultural and linguistic barriers more effectively than any formal diplomatic exchange. President Nawrocki remained kneeling for what felt like an eternity, but was probably less than a minute, his posture communicating both the humility of office and the weight of history. His stillness suggested that he was not simply completing a diplomatic obligation, but engaging in a deeply personal act of recognition. He carried with him not just the ceremonial responsibilities of his presidential role, but the collective memory of Poland's own military sacrifices, the accumulated grief of families across his nation who had lost sons and daughters, fathers, and mothers, brothers and sisters to the recurring nightmare of European warfare. This was not about politics or international headlines, though both would inevitably follow. This was about acknowledgement of a fundamental truth that transcends national boundaries, that war takes without regard for borders, that courage emerges in every culture, and that the debt owed to those who die in service of freedom can never be fully repaid by the living, only honored through remembrance and respected through ceremony. The silence that enveloped Arlington during these moments was different from ordinary quiet. It carried weight, pregnant with the accumulated significance of countless previous acts, of remembrance that had taken place on this same ground. Birds seemed to pause their morning songs, the wind stilled its whispers through the oak and maple trees, and even the distant sounds of Washington's busy traffic faded to nothing. In that perfect stillness, the boundary between the living and the dead seemed to dissolve, creating a space where past and present could meet in mutual recognition. Finally, President Nawrocki rose to his feet and stepped back from the tomb, his gaze remaining fixed on the wreath and the marble monument behind it. He did not immediately turn away, but instead allowed the image to settle deeply into his memory, understanding that this moment would remain with him long after the flowers had faded and the ceremonies had ended. The visual impact of Poland's national colors against America's most sacred military monument would become part of his personal archive of significant experiences, a reminder of the day when two nations' grief and gratitude found common expression in flowers and silence. Then, with the quiet dignity that had characterized his entire approach, he placed his right hand over his heart and inclined his head in a final gesture of respect. This simple movement, though lasting only seconds, seemed to resonate across the still air like a bell struck in a cathedral, a reminder that reverence requires no translation and that respect speaks a language understood by every human heart. Regardless of nationality or native tongue, the immediate aftermath of the wreath-laying ceremony unfolded with the same careful dignity that had characterized the event itself. As President Nawrocki stepped back from the tomb, the spell of perfect silence gradually lifted, but the solemnity remained. No one in the crowd hurried to leave. No one rushed to resume normal conversation. Instead, visitors moved slowly and deliberately, their steps measured and their voices naturally muted, as though speaking too loudly might somehow diminish or disrespect what they had just witnessed. The impact of the ceremony was immediately visible in the changed demeanor of everyone present. Veterans found themselves lingering near the tomb, some approaching to place their own small tokens of respect, challenge coins, unit patches, handwritten notes, beside the presidential wreath. Their faces carried a mixture of pride and melancholy, the complex emotions of survivors who had witnessed friends fall in battles whose names might be forgotten by history, but whose costs remained vivid in personal memory. International visitors, many of whom had come to Arlington as part of standard Washington tourist itineraries, discovered that they had stumbled into something far more significant than a typical sightseeing experience. The ceremony had transformed their understanding of American military culture, demonstrating through action, rather than words, the depth of respect the nation holds for its fallen. Many would later struggle to articulate exactly what they had felt during those moments of profound silence, describing only an overwhelming sense of having been present for something both intensely personal and universally significant. For President Nawrocki himself, the ceremony represented the fulfillment of a commitment that extended far beyond diplomatic protocol. Poland's decision to send its head of state to honor America's unknown soldiers reflected a deep understanding of the bonds forged through shared sacrifice. The red and white wreath was not merely Poland's gift to America, but a bridge connecting the unnamed Polish resistance fighters who died in forests across occupied Europe to the unknown American soldier resting beneath Arlington's marble. It was an acknowledgement that freedom's defenders, regardless of nationality, are united by something stronger than the flags they served under. The historical context surrounding this moment added layers of meaning that resonated far beyond the immediate participants. Poland's journey from Nazi occupation to Soviet domination to democratic independence had been marked by countless acts of heroism that went unrecorded and unrecognized. The Warsaw Uprising of 1944 alone had claimed thousands of Polish fighters whose bodies were never recovered, whose names were lost in the chaos of urban warfare. The forests of occupied Poland had witnessed the deaths of countless partisans who fought and died without expectation of recognition, motivated only by love of country and commitment to freedom. When President Nawrocki knelt at the tomb of the unknown soldier, he was symbolically representing all of these unnamed Polish heroes, bringing their memory across an ocean to stand beside their American counterpart in the democracy they had all died to preserve or protect. The ceremony thus became not just an American moment, but a universal affirmation of the values that unite free nations. The belief that some principles are worth dying for, that sacrifice must be remembered, and that the debt owed to the fallen can never be fully repaid, but must be continuously honored. The media coverage that followed the ceremony carried these images and this message around the world, but the photographs and video footage could only capture the visual elements of what had transpired. The deeper impact, the profound silence, the palpable reverence, the emotional transformation of witnesses, remained beyond the reach of cameras and microphones. Those who were physically present carried with them an experience that transcended documentation, a memory that would influence their understanding of service, sacrifice, and international solidarity for the rest of their lives. The ceremony also served as a powerful reminder of NATO alliance principles that extend beyond strategic calculations to embrace shared values and mutual respect. Poland's membership in NATO, the alliance represented not just military cooperation, but a recognition that democratic nations must stand together in honoring those who have died in freedom's defense. President Nawrocki's presence at Arlington demonstrated that this solidarity extends to the most sacred aspects of military culture, the honoring of the dead and the preservation of their memory. As the crowds finally began to disperse and Arlington returned to its normal rhythm of quiet visitation and ceremonial guard changes, the wreath remained in place, its red and white colors brilliant against the marble. The flowers would eventually fade, as all living things must, but their placement had created something permanent, a moment of connection between nations, a gesture of respect that would be remembered in official records and personal memories, long after the petals had fallen and been swept away. The tomb of the unknown soldier continues its eternal vigil, guarded around the clock by soldiers who understand that their duty extends far beyond the practical requirements of security or ceremony. They are guardians of memory itself, protectors of a sacred trust that connects the living to the dead across generations. President Nawrocki's tribute added another chapter to this ongoing story, demonstrating that the values represented by Arlington's sacred ground, honor, sacrifice, remembrance, and international solidarity, remain as relevant and powerful today as they were when the first unknown soldier was laid to rest beneath the marble nearly a century ago. The silence has returned to Arlington, but it carries with it the echo of that summer morning when Poland's leader knelt in respect beside America's most sacred military monument, proving once again that some bonds transcend borders, some values unite all free peoples, and some acts of remembrance speak louder than any words ever could.